And we're live with our 258th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on social media, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on social media. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. I am again propping our merch today, right? Like one of the hoodies. They're super comfy. Merch.absoluteappsec.com if you're interested. And I've completely thrown off our intro because that's what I'm jumping into today, apparently. So,
well, the merch is the most important part.
Merch is the most important. I did get a shout out from Caleb. He got one of the Logical unicorn head pink shirts that he's going to be repping at B-Sides Nova when it's coming up, right? So if you see Caleb there, give him a shout out and tell him hello. As far as announcements go, we've got the Melbourne training coming up next week. Ken and I both leave later this weekend. And we're going to have, there's still seats available. We're going to have to close up registrations tomorrow evening just to make sure that we get a proper head count. So let me pop the link in there, training.absoluteappsec.com. If you're on the fence, please come do it. This is the AI enhanced version of the course. So we're going to be talking about how to improve your process of secure code review using AI. Along those lines, Ken and I are developing a course that is AppSec AI focused, right? So it's not just going to be secure code review, but the other things that we are doing, as consultants, as developers to enhance our application security process using generative AI. That'll be coming fairly soon. But the first step, those opportunities that are available are the secure code review courses. There is the Melbourne opportunity and a virtual course that we will be running in October. Both are available at training.absoluteappsec.com. Let us know if you have questions or concerns on those, but would love to have you be a part of those courses. Let me see. I think that's everything from an announcements perspective. I guess we are going to be at the conference, and I keep forgetting the name of it. It's the AppSec and DevOps conference in Melbourne. Do you remember do you have a link there for that, Ken?
Right here, right in front of me. I'm putting it in now.
You're looking at it? Okay, sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. There you go. AppSec and DevSecOps. That's why I'm always like, I can't remember if it's DevOps or DevSecOps for Melbourne 2024. Ken and I will be keynoting that event. So we'll be talking about how we got where we're at for, from an application security and DevSecOps perspective. Should be a good one. Always fun to see Cole and everyone in Melbourne, or in Australia, I should say. There's quite a few people coming in from the other metro areas to Melbourne for this event and for the course. So we're excited to get down there. Yeah. I think that's it from an announcement perspective, unless you got something else you wanted, or I'm forgetting, which could very well be the case.
This kind of I was on the fence, but I am going to go also do the, Global Apps, whatever's in SF, the AppSec OWASP thing that's in SF, whatever that is. I'll be there as well. I always say whatever because I can never remember their different names for the different conferences. Yeah, this one's a global one. September 23rd through 27th. So actually, I'll be working in the dry run security booth. So if anybody wants to stop by and say hi, cool. If later after work is done, you want to meet up, chat, also cool, whatever. But I'll be there as well. So yeah, cool. It's been a lot, man. I did done 5 trips so far in about 8 weeks, and I've got 3 more to go: Australia, Florida, and SF. And then I think it's going to be pretty quiet after that for a bit, hopefully. Maybe to Boston. I think there might be something AppSec related in Boston. But how about you? Are you after Australia? Are you like?
So I've got Australia.
You're in Q4, so I assume you're winding down on that.
Yeah,
Oh, you got
a
DeepSec.
little bit. We
Sorry,
got
I keep
DeepSec in
answering you.
November. Yeah. And then actually, albeit the only other thing that I've really got on my radar is SaintCon, right? I help run the like AppSec community stuff for SaintCon. So I'll be there. I don't know. I haven't decided on Global AppSec San Francisco, right? Like talks didn't get picked up for it. And so I was just like, I'm on the fence, right? And actually, that is one thing that I wanted to talk about today, and I almost forgot. But in Slack, there's been a big conversation in a couple of the Slacks that we are in on OWASP developer days associated with Global AppSec and how it's been canceled due to lack of interest. I think I posted it. I can't remember if it was in random. I'm looking now.
Yeah, I was actually looking too.
Yeah, there was a couple
I think
of.
it's in random.
Yeah, I think it's in the random channel. But it's pretty discouraging, right? Like, is that random? No.
Yeah, so like, because it was Jerry who said, "Does anyone know why OWASP canceled developer days?" And then Pedram had responded like with it, just giving some insight, an email he had received. Essentially, they said, sadly, due to a low number of registrations, the OWASP Foundation has decided to cancel Developer Day on September 25th, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So sounded like just a lack of participation was why that got canceled. And then there's a thread from there on various opinions. So yeah, I figure that's where you want to dial in, is on those opinions.
Yes, it is. It always is. Like, I mean, there's a lot of spicy takes on this for sure. To quote, I love how Hoodie Pony always calls it, spicy takes, right?
Yeah.
And like, I'm with. I'm a little discouraged, right? Like, on how OWASP has approached developers. I mean, it's supposed to be this open worldwide application security project. It's supposed to be geared towards developers. And yet what we consistently see at global AppSec conferences, at everything else, is it's security or product security, application security people. There might be a few developers thrown in there. There'll be students that are interested in security, but it is not developer focused. And I mean, like, I'm not going to cut. I don't want to shy away from it anymore, right? Like, it's basically what it boils down to. Is it's not developer focused. It is a tool by which security is pushing their development efforts. Doesn't mean that there's not good things that are going on, but we're missing the mark. And part of this is, right, like, we've been so insular as far as like, hey, when we start talking about even like the OWASP top 10, and Brian and the top 10 team does a great job in categorizing vulnerabilities like nowadays, and actually using some sort of scientific method to come up with the top 10 and, get industry, involvement and approval. And that is still by far the flagship project for OWASP. But it's not coming from developers. Let's be honest about it. It's not coming from developers. It's coming from security. So my question to you, Ken, is how do you get developer involvement in this?
Yeah. Well, I'd love to answer your question right off the bat, but before we do that, I did want to point out, because I was curious, like, what exactly was going to happen during Developer Day? Because I have to be honest, like, even though I knew about it, I didn't really know what was going to happen. And so, like, let's read the description of the event details as listed on Eventbrite. It says, "Have you wondered?" This is the event description. "Have you wondered? I want to send my security champion developers to a conference, but where should I send them? This is exactly the event for this. Security professionals talk about what developers want or need all the time, but how often do we hear from developers themselves? This event changes all of this. Developers are encouraged to come and share their thoughts and opinions about security, what they've done, what they're doing, what's working, and what's not. It's a safe space to share, have open and honest discussions, and learn from each other. You don't have to be a security pro to make a huge impact when it comes to cybersecurity. As a developer, you have a great ability to make a difference at your company. Blah, 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 right? So like a couple more paragraphs or a couple more sentences, kind of all the same stuff. I don't want to, but I mean, basically what that sounds like is pay for developers to travel to a conference to then share with other developers what they're doing in the security space. And I'll just stop right there. I mean, I think that just presented a few objections and problems right off the bat, which is number one, T&E, right? Like we talked about it. We talked about it last episode. Travel and expenses to like physical to physically travel to a in-person conference financially right now for most companies is a non-starter. So right off the bat, you're going to have some challenges. I like the idea that it is for security champions, because I do think that when we talk about security champions, have said that they need to have whatever work they're doing inside of the security space on as part of their, reviews, as part of their career progression in the company, and recognized for their achievements financially in that capacity to make it worthwhile. But however, and well, not a but I would say, and to add to that, if you can also send them for professional development, then that's amazing. That's like an added bonus and part of their work stream. That's a good thing and a positive thing. I just think that right off the bat, when you tell me I have to send a developer to an in-person conference right now, to then have kind of a vague notion of, and this is the second point, of what they're actually going to do there, other than sharing stories and communicating with other developers who might also be working in the security space, that's not, and I could be wrong. Maybe there's more concrete, kind of lists, I'm sure, agenda of what was going to actually happen. But just off the bat, like that's gonna be two things that are very problematic right off the bat. Free form, sort of, we don't know exactly what you're going to do, but it should be helpful. And then, like I said, that the money aspect. So doesn't answer your question. Maybe I'll just bounce it back to you, knowing those are some objections that you would deal with. How would you maybe make some alterations here to then encourage developers?
I'm with you. And like, Aaron, so Sinatra's trash can on YouTube, he brings up the stuff that Andrew was going into about training through a regular conference, right? Anyway, they're talking about something else, but I think we're at a weird phase in conferences and training spaces where the ROI, like the return on investment for sending a developer to a conference that is, say, security specific, probably isn't going to get a lot of uptake. I talk to organizations day in and day out that can't get developers to do a 4-hour training on security because they don't want to sign up for it, right? Like they don't want to take their developers away from the tasks that they actually have to do. So asking them to not only give them up for a full day, but also the travel to pay for it. And the ROI is basically, hey, I can check the box on my compliance training for the year because I sent them to this conference. It's just not there, because you're like, it's a week-long investment from a company perspective when I'm looking at sending them to San Francisco for this. Now it's a different calculus when they're already in San Francisco, but that's probably most of the signups that they had were the handful of developers that were there that were interested in the companies that could send them to that, locally. Right.
Yeah.
And to David's point, right. Like,
well, I was going to ask you, I have another question queued up for you, so I don't mean to interrupt. Okay. So keep going. And then I have another. Yeah.
To Dave's point, like Lintner's jumping in here, right? Like developers' number one job is to make their code support some business requirement or customer feature. If they have $1,500 for training conference budgets, right, they will 100% choose something focused on their number one job. And he's absolutely right. If I'm a development manager, or even I'm an executive in a company, I have developers, I'm not going to send my developers to a security specific conference. I'm going to send them to, hey, we're a Rails shop, right? I'm going to send them to a Ruby conference, because there probably might be a security talk there, but that is going to improve their overall performance for the company. And the ROI is there for that $1,500 in the T&E, where it's not like, as much as I hate to say it, security is an expense. It's not an income generator for most companies. And that's what we have to be realistic about. I mean, we were incredibly optimistic as an organization, as OWASP, trying to put on a developer day conference, but I think we're going about it in an insular manner. And that's where I see the problem. So sorry, what was the other question that you were going to ask?
Well, and so because to blend this question with Andrew's sort of Andrew Wilson. So because Sinatra Trash Can said, "Hey," which is funny to say that out loud. Anyways, they said, okay, I'll just put it up. Andrew's thoughts on how OWASP could help developer cons was smart. Andrew refers to Andrew Wilson, who basically said this was in regards to the OWASP AppSec days in Singapore, 1-day training, teaming, red teaming type stuff. And he was basically saying, like, if I had to distill this down, I think that the thing that I liked the most was if I was targeting developers in my training, I'd flip the script to something more geared around securing the supply chain from a red team perspective. I think it's kind of nice because it does give sort of a offensive view of the world with defensive sort of movement in there. But the reason I bring this up is that my question to you is, given that we're talking about, hey, secure a standalone just security thing, event, course, workshop, whatever, is problematic given the other priorities that developers have and where budget is going to be applied. How would you then blend security, a topic of security, with something else? Like, would you blend it with other things, or is that not even the approach that you would take to bring developers into security? Or do you, there's so many questions. Like, do you find value in that? I'd assume so, but if not, that'd be interesting to hear. And secondly, okay, you find value in pulling developers into the security world a bit. How? Like, what are some approaches you might take?
Well, and like after this like popped up, I spent probably way too much time just thinking about the approach that OWASP has taken over the years, right? And like how insular it is. Like, we're very focused on the security community, and we're trying outreach through these, like, AppSec days or everything else, like local. Like, I like that idea, but it's still too focused on the security community. I feel like there's an opportunity to take like OWASP, our expertise, like the people that are involved in OWASP, and actually start like talking to organizers of developer conferences and creating an OWASP track, security track within those different conferences. So if you went to you went to DjangoCon or PyCon, that community, and basically said, hey, we want to get security more involved with the Python development community. Can we have a track at PyCon that is developer focused, that is security developer and security focused, that would give Python developers the opportunity to come and jump in, and even branded as such, right? Like, oh, hey, there's the OWASP security track at PyCon. At which point, like, that all of those talks will be coming from security engineers or ProdSec engineers or security professionals, but within the context of, hey, it's got to be a Python specific or Python oriented, you're adding value to what they're currently already getting out of it. And this was another thing that like we struggled with, right? Like Pedram and I were chatting about it in random as well. Like, trying to get a security specific talk accepted at a developer conference is incredibly difficult because they typically have 300, 500 talks that are being submitted for something like PyCon or RubyConf. And everyone wants to talk about the new features, what they're doing from a day-to-day perspective, right? Like all of these different things. They don't necessarily want to talk about security 101 stuff, right? Which I get, but it doesn't like it doesn't get picked up, so it's a lot harder to do that. And that's where I think somebody like OWASP that could go in and talk to the organizers on a higher level about, okay, how do we start to fold security in here? We don't want to run a separate conference, but we're willing to bring more people to your conference by providing this value is something that could actually work. I mean,
idea.
at least, yeah.
I love that idea. I mean, because I do remember. I don't remember the year, but I don't know. We'll say pre 2017 Code Mash. I remember OWASP having. So OWASP had a booth at Code Mash in Sandusky, Ohio, and Code Mash is like for those who don't know, that's like one of the I would say cooler conferences in the Midwest for developers, software engineers, and I remember OWASP had a booth, and also I felt like there was some time set aside for OWASP to communicate their mission. I could be wrong. If I went back in the archives, I think I would maybe see them on the schedule. In any case, that's probably the only time I can remember anyways, having seen that in person at a conference. For the most part, it is not a whole track that you see. And I love that idea. I think that you're right, and that it's a better approach to say, let's try it. And it could be like fire talks. It could be something, where they don't have to dedicate a significant amount.
Yeah.
Of
I mean, honestly, like, like we're starting to do, right? Like, so SaintCon is a really good example of this, right? Like SaintCon is definitely a security conference, or DEF CON in general, right? Like 10 years ago, how many AppSec or like developer focused talks did we see at DEF CON? Not a lot, right?
Not
like at all. But now we have the AppSec Village, right? Like that same sort of model is something that OWASP could apply to these developer conferences, or like the AppSec community could, or AppSec Village could, right? Like you could take that to Code Mash, you could take it to RubyConf, and give some talks and actually provide some value within the context of, hey, they're already spending their training budget by going to these developer conferences. Let's piggyback on top of that instead of trying to give them yet another conference to attend that management is probably going to poo-poo, or right. Like, most developers aren't going to get to DEF CON and Black Hat on their own, on company dime. They're just not.
Yeah.
It's not something that is, is prioritized for their role within the company. So, yeah.
Yeah. So David has a question here I'm going to post up, which is, do you think the average engineer actually cares enough about security? I don't know. Do you want to?
Yeah.
I actually work alongside engineers right now, but we are a company that builds a security product, and David knows what that's like, right? When you are a company that builds a security product, engineers are going to be like, I don't care at all about, security. That's really important. It's pretty fairly important. So my perspective at the moment would be skewed. I could harken back to GitHub. But yeah, Seth, you work and consult with various groups that have engineers, so maybe you want to field it.
Yeah, I will, right? Like, I mean, the developers that I talk to day in, day out, because you would actually be surprised. I don't talk to a lot of security champions. I talk to mostly just like run-of-the-mill developers. They care about security to the point that, to the level that they are allowed to care about security, right? It's definitely not top focus number one, but it is so interesting, right? Like, there's a company that we've been involved with for years that we just ran like a threat modeling engagement with, right? Or, workshop with. And this was the first year that it wasn't just like, oh, there's the security people and a couple of the upper level, like software engineering managers. It was a couple of the engineers that were underneath that. And the stuff that those guys think about, like they don't want their code exploited. They know when they have deficiencies. They know what keeps them up at night. And the threats that they're thinking about are on par with what I can come up with when I'm looking at an application. And to that point, they have better in-depth knowledge about where the skeletons are in that code base and what they're doing that is dangerous, right? They know when they're developing something, when they're not thinking about security and where those problems could exist. And so like, yeah, like if you're talking about junior engineers, that are just pulling stuff off Stack Overflow or from Chat GPT or using Copilot to write their code, it's probably not the most secure. But no developer that wants to improve their development or their developing chops, their coding chops, is going to ignore security because they know that it's got to be secure. They don't want to be the weak link in that chain in, hey, we got hacked and it was because of code that I wrote. We all like to do a good job at some level. There's very few people that are in the industry in software engineering or in security that are like, hey, I'm just going to phone it in because I don't care. Right.
Yeah. And I guess there's also
at least that's my experience. Yeah. Go ahead.
There's almost like, based off what you said, it brings up a good point that like, yeah, I don't want to be the one who has the security issue or introduces the security issue. I don't want to be the one that causes myself and others to have to do incident response bits. I don't want to be the one that causes us to have a reputation damage, to pay out bug bounty costs, all that. But really, what are those things saying? They're saying, I don't want to be, it's kind of a fear-driven motivation where it's like, I don't want to be a bad kid, right? I don't want to do the bad thing and get in trouble. I would argue, as I'm thinking about it, that's not the same as caring. Like, I can make something want to work well enough for it to work, but that doesn't mean I'm passionate about it being awesome and being really robust. So while I don't want to necessarily introduce a bug today, it takes a bit of a step beyond to then say, okay, but I want to go farther and make maybe, I don't know, the authorization schema here more or harder to bypass in some weird way, or I want to make it very, very obvious that if we override this thing over here in the application, that it's a very scary and dangerous thing, because I really care. When you say care, it's like, do I care about getting in trouble, or am I passionate about doing things the best way? Do I think most developers are passionate about building the most robust and securely designed systems? No, I do not. Yeah, exactly what David said. It's forced caring. I don't think that if from that perspective, there's a lot of developers on the whole that are very passionate about that. However, I'd argue, and I saw this at a conference, and I'm so sorry, I can't remember the name. It was a developer conference. It was here last year in Arlington, and I want to say it was David Aronson or something like that who put on a talk about Codosaurus, I think is his handle. And the talk was basically saying like, hey, secure code is quality code, right?
Yeah.
It needs to be functional. It needs to be secure. Developers do care. And then there was another talk where it was a similar sort of like, these are important. This is why security is important. And it was a developer. I mean, this is a developer conference built, spoken at and run by developers. And there were at least 2 talks where they were saying like the things that we would want to hear. Amazing progress there for sure. But again, I think that's where security champions tend to bubble up, is because those people tend, in my experience, to be the people that actually are passionate in a positive way instead of just fear driven towards, hey, I want to like help improve our authorization, or I want to do the next service to service sort of auth dance thing, or I want to like help you integrate your tooling better into the CI/CD or whatever it may be, or be more involved in threat models or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Finding that
So
small percentage of people is always to me gonna be a challenge, but they do exist. I just don't think they're the majority. So that's my long-winded way of saying that.
Yeah. And I think that's like, I didn't focus in on that cares enough question that David's asking, right? Do they care enough about security? Yeah, they're. I don't think they're given the space to care enough about security, right? In general, that's what I find is they're like, he also brings up the point that you don't want to be the one that holds up a feature release and loses that $5 million, customer. That you don't, right? Like that's your job is built on generating features. And if you don't generate those features in a timely manner, you're not going to get paid. You're going to get let go. The company's going to go out of business. So, unless the company gives you space to go in and look at authorization authentication and gives you space to go learn that stuff, then you're not going to do it. And I think that's the whole reason why, like why we have such a hard time getting security talks into developer specific conferences, is that it's not the highest priority for most organization and most developers. So you look at something like RubyConf or PyCon or whatever it is, the way that talks get accepted there is not but via committee, it's by community vote. So the developers that are members of the Python community go in and vote on what talks they would like to see that year. And the popular talks are the ones that are picked up. And so that goes back to my point on, they think they know about the OWASP top 10. So that's not something that's going to get, a majority of votes for PyCon. It's not, which is fine because they need to know about the new features. They need to know about how they can implement X, Y, and Z. So we probably just need to do a better job in security of applying security stuff to modern frameworks, to modern principles to get those talks actually generated. But yeah.
Yep. Probably send our best ambassadors, our most entertaining, for real. I mean, you want to represent the community and in another community as best as possible. This is what David said. This is what the security community has to realize, which should allow us to meet developers where they're at and start helping them instead of gating them. Yeah, I agree. I mean, believe me, I agree that we need to help developers 100%. And I do think, though, it'll be pretty difficult, or it can be pretty difficult to identify the ones that you want to, I guess you would say, slot them as a security champion, but I would argue, maybe these are the people you would want in other capacities as well, like people that are going to help with design conversations. I think that was one thing that was very interesting is like when we were developing code spaces and we had these very regular meetings, like very frequent, sometimes multiple times a week meetings, coordinated between Microsoft side, GitHub side. I will say all of the developers on that specific project, this is the one time it was like pretty incredible because they were all very focused on the security bits. And obviously you're giving an IDE that executes code in a web browser and then pulls repositories with permissions and pushes to repositories and pushes artifacts and all these things. So it obviously makes sense that people were very concerned, and they should be. But that was the one time where I would say, like, yeah, everybody on that project was actually, I would at times more focused on the security part than even the performance, which was surprising. But besides that, I really haven't seen that the rest of my career.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Any final sort of thoughts on this subject before we move on to other stuff?
I have lots of thoughts, but we can take it to Slack, right? Like, I struggle with, how OWASP is like the AppSec Day idea that they're popping to different places and doing it. It's worked in some places, right? Like the first time that we went to Melbourne was for an AppSec Day that was down there that was, OWASP affiliated. But then you also like the way that OWASP is splintered between various OWASP chapters that actually run these different AppSec days, right? Like there's a lot of variability in what's actually going on. I know they're trying to address that, but anyway, I mean, I think my takeaway is similar to what Dave is saying, is that we need to meet developers where they're at and not try to introduce something else that they have to go do. So more focus on, and this is my own takeaway, right? Like as far as running a consulting company where I talk to developers day in and day out, we are starting to prioritize developer conferences over security conferences, because those are, development, software engineering, project management conferences. Those are the people that we talk to on a day-to-day basis. The security conferences are great for, networking and seeing people that we know, but it doesn't necessarily drive business for us like some of the developer conferences do. So that's where our priority has started to shift to. Anyway, we weren't even going to talk about this today. Yeah. This was not even on the list of stuff that we thought we were going to talk about today. And now exactly. This is how the podcast goes. So I don't know. Any final thoughts?
Nope.
Okay.
I was trying to think of anything that, hey, one last thing I can say is that the way I identified security champions at Living Social when I worked there circa how long, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, was through Stripe CTF and folks that spent a lot of time on those CTFs and completed it and won and all that were the folks that I then ended up engaging with for security needs on the developer side. So I guess I'll plug SecDim solution. That seems like a good sort of CTF. Identify your security enthusiastic folks. Other than that, I'm sure there's CTFs out there. That's one way to do it, but that's the only other thought I have. And then Andrew comes in, Andrew Wilson. Common thread among non-security people is that security practitioners are insular, helping provide access to community, especially with vetting talks, would be pretty valuable. Yeah, I agree.
Yep.
And thanks for commenting, Andrew. As always, You are the man.
Cool. Good. Well, we have a couple other, obviously, the newsletter, we'll list all of the different articles that we'd considered for today. If you aren't subscribed to the newsletter, please do that. It's just you go absoluteappsec.com. There is a subscribe button that's there. And we'll, expand out a little bit our thoughts on those different articles. But what else would you like to talk about today? I know we've got probably time for, one article to dig into one of these things. I don't know if you want to talk about ALBeast or the Krebs local network domain name collisions.
I think we'll have time for both, actually. I mean, I don't think the ALBeast one is actually that. There's a lot written, but when I talk about it, I could probably distill it down to just few details that are not too hard. So I mean, I'll do that one. Do you want to share it, or I can share it? I don't really mind, or meaning on the screen, not I'm putting the link in right now.
I can share it quick. Yep, I got it up here.
Cool.
There you go.
So the TLDR, as far as I could grok, because I had very little, unfortunately. Anyways, from me skimming the article, what it looked like to me, and I'll talk about some of the key points here, but at a high level, there has been an update towards this. The updates mainly around documentation. Funny enough. In any case, so what happens? Essentially, ALB. Let's first mention what an ALB is. It's an application load balancer. The idea being that as requests pour in, you can distribute those requests to different EC2s so that you can load balance those requests and not overload one machine. Also, there's some level of authentication performed that's going to come in to play here in a moment, and then firewall gateway bits, I think, as well. In any case, so this is what's been impacted as ALB, and it seemed like from what I read, if I am an attacker and I want to attack a site who's vulnerable to this, and this being able to forge tokens that make it look like I have passed or I've been issued rather my tokens through that ALB. What I would do is I would set up my own ALB. I would get it to sign a token. I would provide or I would change the KID value when I send a request off to the application load balancer. What it would fail to do is check the signer and issuer bits of the token to validate that they came from the victim's ALB and not my ALB. And that's the gist of it. Basically, I can forge tokens to shovel in the data that I want. As long as I have the ability to spin up an ALB, I can forge a token, put in the bits of data that I want. It'll all look valid and signed properly. It just doesn't care about, basically it cares about that it's signed properly. It does, and that it's using, the public key that you provided, it matches up with what, how it's signed. But what it doesn't care about is who signed it. That's the crux of the issue, right? Like that's where and how many times have we seen this mismatch? I mean, it happens in so many applications where it's like, and we, especially when it comes to GraphQL, see this a lot. And those authorized, because most of those authorization schemas are not, some library that you've plugged into or something that's well vetted. It's oftentimes, more often than not, your own custom authorization. We've talked about this before, where it's like, yes, you're authorized to make a change because you're a manager of, say, a team, but then it fails to actually validate that the team ID, for instance, that you're requesting is the team ID that you should actually be modifying. That's just one very basic example. And this is like kind of the similar situation that we're seeing here. And I think the last thing that's relevant to really mention is that, as I said before, AWS pretty much to fix this, updated their documentation and code samples to give a like, hey, let's validate that the ALB that you are signing for is excuse me, to valid. I think I actually have to look at the code example, but it's something along the lines of, you can say like, this is the specific ALB ARN. What is it? Access resource number or AWS resource number or something like that.
Yep.
Or something like that. ARN. It's like an identifier, and you say like, this is the one that specifically I'm signing this with, and it needs to come, from this specific ALB, and that's sort of that's kind of the fix. But however, they identified something like 15,000 out of 371,000 ALBs were still vulnerable. And they said that what AWS is going to do, or is doing, I guess, is reaching out to those that are still impacted by this, rather than like change their side of the things. And they quote the shared responsibility model. Rather than fix that, they're just going to notify customers that they're potentially vulnerable, and then also send them like, here's how you fix it. So anyways, that's everything I know. Any spice to add to all of this, or any thoughts, juicy thoughts?
I'm not overly surprised, right? Like, it's authorization issues. And then like, this is it's a common pattern that we see, that like the way that we're generating authentication tokens or authorization tokens is not properly validated. All we're checking for is the existence of it, and whether or not that token is in the proper format. We're not actually validating it deeply, right? And it seems like every report that we write nowadays has some sort of an authorization flaw in it. So, these edge cases are going to pop up. Just because you're AWS doesn't mean that you're not going to have these same sort of things that are there, if you don't instruct people on how to actually properly validate an ARN, validate that the key being used is the key that you expected, right? Like, and I think that's where most people are going to run into this, is they just didn't realize that they needed to validate that key, right?
Yeah. I mean, why? Of all the, let's be honest, man. Just getting anything to work sometimes inside of these environments is
Yeah.
its own challenge, let alone the minutia of token signing.
Yeah,
And it
exactly.
goes back and it literally dovetails into what we just talked about. It's like, do I care? It's like, yeah, I mean, I care, but like,
Yeah.
to what degree can I spend on this? To like
Yeah.
and not even like from a time perspective, but just from a mental energy, like where would I just point me in a direction of things I might need to care about. And then, yeah, sure, like I can care, right? But I
Mhm.
don't like of all the things that I'm thinking about in this next sprint, the minutia of token signing and the hovering above this 50,000 foot view of what all we have to get done is probably not,
And this
the
is,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and most, like, it's interesting because a lot of asks that I get from developers around authorization, around authentication is, "Hey, can you validate that we did this properly and we didn't screw it up?" Right?
right.
Because we know that this is critical to security, but we don't have the expertise to dig into the key IDs to do all of this, or we don't have the time. And so we need a third party to validate it as we move on. And then they're really just asking for, give us some instructions, right? Tell us the proper way to do it, and we'll do it that way. Um, but don't make us go and fuzz the entire like key signing process in order to determine that, because the organization, the developers just don't have that time, right? And that, yeah,
Absolutely.
again, goes back to what David said about meeting developers where they're at. And Andrew's comments about like, oh, security, like we'll look at something like this. Oh, you guys screwed up, right? Like, the way that we go about it comes across as pretty high and mighty, when we would probably make the same exact mistake if we were to actually try and sling code and write the code in the same manner. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's not, and
Yeah.
it really does come down to sort of like what you said. Like, can I? It's funny. I know that there's something sensitive here. I know it's scary. I may not have a security resource to reach out to too. That's always a reality, that people
Mhm.
face, right? They may have a security person, but it may be like a smaller company where it's like a generalist who does like, I don't know, badge access one day, loading MDM stuff on laptops, the you know what I mean, like spread all over the place. So, but yeah, I thought it was.
Yeah.
I guess it's very. Thank you. Who was the Migo? Is that how you say it?
Uh-huh.
Research. You should give them a shout
Yeah.
out. Um,
Migo.io. Yeah, it's good research, right? Yeah.
yeah, very cool. And also a shout out to, because honestly, it harkens back to the JWT attacks, which all JWT attacks Portswigger. Their article on that actually, which is just amazing. Like the most common JWT attacks. It's actually exactly what they talk about in that. So I'm posting it now. It's just done through an ALB and in a different way, but same concept. Not validating issuers, being able to forge and sign things and attest to things that aren't real
Yep.
arbitrarily. So,
Yep.
but yeah. So
Yeah.
now the next one, we still have time, and I know you have
Okay.
a hard stop in 6 minutes, but I think we still have time for,
Yeah. Let me post it in
if you
here really
do.
quick. Yep. Yep. We can do it really quick. So let's see. Local networks. This one's from Krebs. And it's been a while since we've actually talked about one of the Krebs articles, right? But this is the exact problem that we talked about a number of I'll have to go back and look at the episode where we actually discussed the .zip and .dev domains, or the TLDs, top level domains, and the issues that were going to crop up because of it, right? So Krebs is looking at one, let's see, yeah, one's article that somebody's published about namespace collisions, specifically the use of these sorts of TLD for internal purposes. So .dev is the big one, right? Google decided that .dev should be its own TLD, like publicly available TLD. And a lot of organizations at that time were using .dev internally as a resource to just point at internal resources. So we've got like, whatever your database server.dev only is routable internally. But the second that becomes a publicly available domain, means that the lookup will go external, and you might be sending development data to a third party because of how it's been defined and it's how it's being used. Yeah. And so, right, like they dig into a number of different examples of this. Like example.com is always a good one because that's, what people use, right? Like if you own example.com, you could probably get tons of good information about hundreds of organizations, if not thousands of them across the world. And some of that could contain secrets, right? So that's exactly what we're looking at. It sounds like this security consultancy, Seralysis, did some research into namespace collisions, specifically around the TLDs that appeal to businesses. And that's what I'm looking at here. .ad for Active Directory domains, associates.cloud, consulting.dev. And you could argue that there's others here, like .zip again is one of those that I'm like, gosh, like I don't like the fact that that's there because it is a file, extension. It should be a TLD, but yeah. But
Yeah, it is.
one of the
Also,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Nope. Yeah, what were you going to say? Also,
well, actually, what I'll say is like I could see so many little weird edge case scenarios where you just end up making like I don't know, like trying to single sign on to like an actual server versus and sharing keys over like a local one or
yeah,
doing some sort of like you said trying to access or send some bit of sensitive information, whether that's I don't know logging related or if it's like I don't know, just could be a myriad of weird ways that could impact. Did they go through any examples of things they've seen in like real?
yeah. So this company, so I can't even say his name right. Like this Italian discovered that Cataregli, he discovered an encryption certificate that was still valid for this domain, right? That was available for registration. So somebody had generated an encryption certificate and he was able to actively like register that domain and basically start to retrieve all of the communications from those Windows servers trying to authenticate with that domain, right? And right, like,
and it's police.
And it's police cars, right? It's laptops. Yeah, it gets worse, right? Police cars have a laptop and they're attaching to that domain. And at that point, you could start to dump credentials and you could take over the help desk. And yeah, it's pretty amazing, right? Like, yeah. Information security manager of City of Memphis confirmed that Memphis's police department was sharing their Microsoft Windows credentials with the domain. And the city was working with him to transfer the domain to them, right? So they had set it up and they hadn't necessarily realized that it was there, right? Now, yeah, okay, so like...
Oh, I see that, the AD structure. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so many organizations rather than because .locals for local, it's not supposed to go outbound, but it says, however, Cataregli said many organizations seem to have missed that memo and gotten things backwards, setting up their internal AD structure around the perfectly routable domain local.ad. And you know what's funny is because I was wondering, I was like, why in the world would police laptops be calling out? And I was like, do they have advertisements? Like, are they like, hold on, before you pull this person over, I'm just going to show you this quick 30-second ad. But no, this makes a lot more sense.
But so I love it when the threats that we discuss at some point years ago actually start to surface. And this exactly falls into that bucket, right? We've always said that the expansion of TLDs can lead to unintended consequences when IT personnel don't realize the impact of what they are actually doing. And that's what's happening here. The Memphis Police Department didn't realize it. They used .ad instead of .local as the TLD for their internal Active Directory. And the second that someone registered it, In the public context, the domain lookups for each of those laptops is going public first. And then if that fails, then probably goes to the local one, but the public one gets priority. All of those sign-ins are going to that public, domain, and all of a sudden somebody's just taken over your entire IT infrastructure because you chose to use that as your domain name internally. Amazing, right? Like it's great research. It's rather entertaining, but I don't know if we get around it, right? It's just, how do we actually get the word out that they shouldn't be using these domains for this sort of thing? Yeah, I mean,
get a security track inside of a developer conference, and then
there you go. Yeah,
spread the good word.
Spread the word. But I mean, is that a developer conference or an IT conference? I guess. I don't know. It's going.
Seems like the way you get the word out is just by exploiting stuff, but not like in a horribly malicious way. I mean, pretty much every good thing I've ever seen happen, improvement wise, comes from actually like exploiting. I hate to say that. That's very tongue in cheek for those listening who can't see the smile on my face. But am I wrong though? Am I wrong though?
No, not really. So, but go and read the article. It's an entertaining read, right? Like, there's other they talk about WPAT as well. And, there's other domains that you should, or TLDs that you should be concerned about that do get used in the same way. But make sure that what you're using internally is in fact only internal before you actually dig into it. Now that there's so many TLDs, right? Like, I don't even know what the full list is anymore. No one really does, right? Like, I guess, ICANN does. They have the full list published somewhere, but you're not necessarily going to recognize it. So,
yeah.
Cool. Well, that is, I do have to hop off today. But any final
thoughts? At least you do what I did last time, where I was like, I have to leave now, and I felt bad about that. No, just super excited for Melbourne. And by the way, it turns out I kind of did have to leave the thing, but I wish I hadn't. Let me put it that way. In any case, so excited for AppSec and DevSecOps Melbourne conference next week. Definitely, absolutely charged up and ready to go to give 2 days of training again in person in Australia. Cannot wait. Can't wait to see everybody. I think we maybe even got a dinner thing going potentially with some of the folks from the podcast on Monday, which I'm again very, very stoked for. So grateful, humbled, happy to be allowed to train people and go out there and but also give that keynote with you at the conference about the origins of AppSec. We're going to cover like the last 26 years, roughly. Like what else happened? Why are we where we are at? Where can we go next? Where do we think the future is going to bring us? So that should be a really good talk. And then I'll let's see, plug anything else. I'll plug one other thing because Try Run, Redpoint, they're sponsors of the podcast. I'll say this: we just now released a new feature. We're feature flagging people in, but basically, what's very interesting about it is you have lots of changes going on in your organization. Speaking of security champions, we rely on security champions to usually tell us about what's going on. Maybe we watch the releases process, but unfortunately, we don't usually always know about like features that ship or changes to infrastructure or things like that when we should. So this new feature that we've delivered, basically, we're aggregating all the changes that occur inside of your organization and telling you about which ones are fairly important to you to know about. Not necessarily that they have security issues in them, but they are in some way sensitive. So that's the last thing I'll kind of plug, and that is Dry Run Security. I know Mike owes us some copy, and then we're going to do a plug for content, or excuse me, for cloud. I was going to call it content security, cloud security partner, CSP. So when we get that marketing blurb stuff in, I'll promote it. Anyways, you got any last things? I know you got to get going.
No, I mean, if you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, we do have a prospectus. Reach out to us, info@absoluteappsec.com, or Seth or Ken at absoluteappsec.com. So otherwise, we'll see everybody online, and appreciate you listening and interacting. And yeah, excited to see people next week as well. Thanks all.